The moment I walked into that conference room in my dress uniform, my father looked up from his coffee and let out a short laugh. Not a proud laugh. The kind that says, "You've got to be kidding me." My mother pressed her lips together and turned toward the window, as if suddenly fascinated by the parking lot 3 floors below. I stood there in the doorway and let them look. My name is Rachel Mercer. I was 31 years old that morning, and I had driven 4 hours through the Virginia mountains to sit in a lawyer's office in Clarksburg, West Virginia, because my grandfather had died 2 weeks earlier and left behind 42 acres, a farmhouse, and apparently, a few surprises. I hadn't worn the uniform in 8 months. I'd retired from the Army at 29 after 7 years of service, 2 deployments to Afghanistan, 1 to Kuwait, a combat medic assignment that earned me a commendation I never talked about at family dinners. Because at family dinners, my father talked, and what my father talked about was my brother, Derek Mercer, 36 years old, sales manager at a regional medical supply company in Charleston, coached Little League on weekends, drove a clean white pickup truck, and called his mother every Sunday. Derek was, by every account in our family, the one who had turned out right. I was the one who had left. The conference room smelled like old carpet and printer ink. A long oak table sat in the center with 6 chairs around it. My Uncle Paul was already seated, scrolling his phone. His wife Linda sat beside him, a paper cup of water in front of her that she hadn't touched. My Aunt Carol, my grandfather's youngest daughter, was in the corner chair, wearing a black cardigan even though it was the middle of June. My brother Derek sat directly across from the empty chair I was clearly meant to take. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him and a pen uncapped, like he was ready to take notes, like this was a business meeting he intended to win. When I pulled out the chair across from him, he looked at the uniform the same way my father had, top to bottom. Then he set the pen down slowly and leaned back. "You're really wearing that," he said. "I'm really wearing it," I said. My father reached over and touched my mother's hand. She still hadn't turned away from the window. The attorney's name was Mr. Gerald Watts. He was in his late 60s, compact and deliberate. With reading glasses he kept taking on and off. He came in carrying a manila folder and a leather binder, set them both on the table without ceremony, and sat down. "Thank you all for being here," he said. "I know some of you have traveled. I'll try to make this as straightforward as I can." He opened the folder. I thought about my grandfather while Mr. Watts arranged his papers. Harlan Mercer, 81 years old when he passed, sitting in his recliner with the television on low and the back door open so he could hear the wind in the pines. That was how my cousin found him on a Thursday afternoon in late May. Peaceful, the paramedics said, like he'd just decided to be done. Harlan Mercer had served in Vietnam, 2 tours. He came home in 1971, bought 42 acres outside Clarksburg with money he'd saved and borrowed, built a house with his own hands, and spent the next 50 years working that land. He raised 3 children in that house. He buried a wife in the church cemetery 2 miles down the road. He kept a small American flag on the porch railing year-round, and every single time I came to visit, he would meet me at the door and shake my hand before he hugged me. He was the only person in my family who shook my hand. "We'll begin with the primary asset," Mr. Watts said, and everyone in the room sat a little straighter. Derek uncapped his pen again. The farm had been in conversation for 2 years, ever since Grandpa Harlan's first small stroke had made it clear that the question of what happened to the property was no longer abstract. My father and Uncle Paul had both assumed, in the way that people assume things they haven't been told directly, that the land would be divided equally among the 3 surviving children. That meant 1/3 each to my father, Uncle Paul, and Aunt Carol. The farmhouse, the acreage, the outbuildings, split 3 ways. Everybody gets something. Everybody moves on. Derek had already been talking to a developer. I knew this because my cousin Jennifer had texted me in April. "Did you know Derek's been meeting with some land company out of Morgantown? Just thought you should know." I'd saved the text and said nothing. Mr. Watts cleared his throat. "The property at 4,418 Ridgehaven Road," he said, reading from the document, "comprising the main residence, all outbuildings, and 42 acres as described in the attached survey, is to be transferred in full to my granddaughter, Rachel Ann Mercer." The room didn't make a sound for about 4 seconds. Then my father said, "I'm sorry, what?" Mr. Watts took his glasses off. "The property transfers in full to Rachel Mercer. There are no subdivisions, no partial bequests to other parties regarding the real estate. There are separate financial disbursements to the other beneficiaries, which I'll outline in a moment, but the land and the house go to Rachel. My Uncle Paul stood up. He didn't say anything. He just stood up, like he needed to be vertical in order to process the information. Derek put his pen down very carefully on the legal pad, parallel to the top edge, the way someone does when they are trying very hard to appear calm. "That's not possible," my father said. "He would have said something. He would have told me." "Mr. Mercer," Mr. Watts said, "your father was of sound mind and he was very deliberate about this document. He updated it 14 months ago, after his stroke, with full legal counsel." "Rachel hasn't even been here," Derek said. He said it like he was pointing out a fact that everyone in the room had somehow missed. "She's been gone for 7 years. She didn't come home for Mom's surgery. She missed Christmas 3 years in a row." I looked at my hands on the table. "She was deployed," my mother said, very quietly, from her seat beside the window. Everyone looked at her. She had turned away from the parking lot. She was looking at me. "She was deployed," my mother said again. "2 of those Christmases, she was in Afghanistan. I knew that. She stopped, pressed her lips together again. "I just didn't say it." Derek shifted in his seat. "That doesn't explain why Grandpa would." "There's a letter," Mr. Watts said. He reached into the binder and produced an envelope, white, sealed, with my name written on the outside in my grandfather's handwriting. The old man had printed everything in block letters since his vision started going. Every birthday card, every note tucked into a Christmas package. I recognized it immediately. Mr. Watts slid it across the table to me. I didn't open it right away. I just set my hand flat on top of it. "Are you serious?" Derek said. Not a question. He was staring at the envelope. "He left her a letter. He left letters for several of you," Mr. Watts said. He produced 2 more envelopes and slid them toward my father and Aunt Carol. Uncle Paul had finally sat back down. His wife Linda was looking at her untouched cup of water. My brother did not receive an envelope. I watched Derek register this. The way his jaw shifted. The way he looked at my father, who was holding his own envelope and not opening it. "Can I ask?" Derek said. And his voice had changed now, gone quieter in a way that wasn't soft. "Can I ask what the reasoning is? Is there reasoning in there?" "Because I have put time into this property. I've helped maintain it. I've driven up here. I've mowed that field. You had the locks rekeyed last November," I said. Everyone looked at me. "You had the locks changed on the farmhouse last November," I said again. "Without asking Grandpa. Without telling anyone. You told him it was for his safety. That you were worried about the neighbor's kid who'd been helping him around the property. But that kid was 19 years old and had been cutting Grandpa's firewood for 3 years. You had the locks changed so you'd control access to the property before he passed." Derek's expression didn't move. "Jennifer told me," I said. My father turned to look at Derek. Slowly. "The way you turn when you already suspect the answer." "That's not," Derek started. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm just here because Grandpa asked me to be." I opened the envelope. "I'm not going to read the whole letter to you. Some of it was private, the kind of thing a grandfather writes to a granddaughter when he knows he's writing it for the last time. But there was a part he had clearly written knowing it might be read aloud, or at least knowing that I might need to explain it to people in that room. His handwriting got slightly larger in those sentences, the way it did when he wanted to be sure he was understood. "I am leaving the farm to Rachel because she understands what it cost. Not the money, the cost of showing up when it's hard. The cost of going somewhere hard because it's right, not because it's easy or comfortable or because someone told you it would look good for you. I have watched this family choose comfortable for a long time. Rachel chose different. She comes back to me quieter than she left, and I know that quiet, and I know what it means, and I am proud of it in a way I don't have the words for. The farm should belong to someone who knows what things cost." I folded the letter. My father had both his hands flat on the table. He was staring at the wood grain. Aunt Carol was crying quietly, not trying to hide it. She had opened her own envelope and was holding it against her chest. "He talked to you about this," my father said. "He wasn't asking me. He was saying it the way you say something when the pieces are finally assembling and you're not sure whether you're angry or ashamed. He called me in February," I said. "He asked if I wanted the farm. I told him I didn't need it. He said that wasn't what he asked." My father exhaled slowly through his nose. Derek pushed back his chair and stood up. "I need some air," he said, and walked out. The door didn't slam. That was almost worse. Mr. Watts let the room sit in silence for a moment, the way experienced people do when silence is the most useful thing. Then he continued going through the remaining distributions, savings accounts, a small investment portfolio, personal property in a measured, professional tone that gave everyone something neutral to focus on. When it was done, my Uncle Paul shook my hand before he left. He didn't say anything. Linda picked up her untouched cup of water, thought better of taking it, and set it back down. Aunt Carol hugged me for a long time and whispered something against my shoulder that I think was "He loved you so much, baby girl." But I'm not completely certain because her voice was very small. My mother and father stayed. My father waited until the room was empty except for the three of us. Mr. Watts had excused himself to make copies. The late afternoon light was coming through the vertical blinds in long pale strips across the table. "I owe you something," my father said. I looked at him. He was 63 years old. He had my grandfather's hands wide across the knuckles, the kind that looked like they'd done more work than they actually had. He'd spent his career in insurance, in an office, in meetings, not unlike this one. He was not a bad man. I had never thought he was a bad man. I had only thought, for most of my adult life, that he had trouble seeing me. "When you enlisted," he said, "I told your mother it was a phase. I said you'd be back in a year." He paused. Then I said 2 years. Then I said you'd come home after the first deployment. He shook his head. "I kept expecting you to fail. Not I didn't want you to fail. I just couldn't picture you succeeding because I couldn't picture what it looked like. And when I can't picture something, I tend to laugh," I said. He looked at me. "Yeah." My mother reached over and put her hand on my arm. Not patting, just resting it there. It was the most she'd touched me in probably 4 years, and neither of us acknowledged it. And it was enough. "I'm not angry," I said. "And I meant it, mostly. I just needed you to see it." "I see it," my father said. We sat there a while longer. The air conditioner cycled on. Outside in the hallway, a phone rang twice and stopped. I found Derek in the parking lot, leaning against the back of his truck with his arms crossed, looking at the street. The afternoon was warm, that thick June warmth that sits in the low valleys of West Virginia like something that's decided to stay. I walked over and stood beside him. Not quite close enough to be confrontational, just close enough to talk. He didn't look at me. "I'm going to need some time," he said. "I know. I'm not saying you don't deserve it. I'm saying I need time." "That's fair," I said. He was quiet for a moment. A truck went by on the main road. Somewhere down the block, someone was mowing. "Did you know?" he asked. "Before today?" "He told me in February that he was thinking about it," I said. I didn't know what he'd decided. Derek nodded slowly. "The developer I was talking to," he started. "I don't need to know about that," I said. He looked at me then. The afternoon light caught the side of his face, and for just a second he looked like he was about 17, and we were back at the farm and none of this had happened yet. "I mowed that field," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I know you did," I said. I didn't say anything else. I didn't tell him that mowing a field is different from loving a place. I didn't tell him that Grandpa Harlan had called me 6 times in the last year of his life, and that every conversation had started with, "How are you really, Rachel?" Not the version you tell people. I didn't tell him that the old man had sent me a photograph last Christmas of the back porch in the snow, with a note on the back that said, "Keeping the light on." I didn't tell him any of that. I just stood there beside my brother in the parking lot until he uncrossed his arms, and that was the beginning of something, even if neither of us had a name for it yet. I drove out to the farm that evening. The key I'd had for 12 years still worked. Derek had only changed the front lock, not the back, and I let myself in through the kitchen door the way I always had, the way my grandfather had taught me when I was 9 years old. "Front door is for guests," he'd said. "Back door is for family." The house smelled like him. Pine and coffee, and the faint, specific smell of old wood smoke that had been in the walls for 50 years and would probably be there for 50 more. The recliner was still in its spot by the window. The small television. The reading lamp. I walked through the room slowly. The bedroom with its plain white curtains. The bathroom with the avocado green tile he'd always meant to replace and never gotten around to. The back bedroom that had been my grandmother's sewing room, and after she passed, had become a kind of archive boxes of photographs, a box of letters, his Vietnam service records in a manila envelope that I had looked through only once, years ago, with his permission. I went out onto the back porch and sat in one of the old chairs and watched the light go down over the ridge. The 42 acres stretched out below and around the house, the lower field that caught the morning light, the woodline along the creek, the old equipment shed with its rusted tin roof. A whip-poor will was calling somewhere in the pines, the same sound I'd fallen asleep to every summer as a child. I had fallen asleep to it in tents in Afghanistan too, in those strange half-dreaming moments when the brain goes somewhere safe. And I had thought of exactly this porch, this ridge, this particular quality of early dark. I thought about what my grandfather had written. She comes back quieter than she left, and I know that quiet, and I know what it means. He had known. He had always known. It was the thing about Harlan Mercer that no one in my family fully gave him credit for, that he had come back from his own war and carried his own quiet, and that it had made him fluent in something that most people never learned to read. I stayed until full dark. Then I went inside, found the blanket my grandmother had made folded on the back of the sofa, and I slept in the house for the first time in 3 years. In the morning I made coffee in my grandfather's percolator, the old aluminum one he'd used since before my father was born, and I sat at the kitchen table and I opened my laptop and I started making a list. The roof needed work. I'd seen the patch job on the south side. The fence line along the lower field had a section down. The kitchen faucet had been dripping since at least 2019. None of it was beyond fixing, all of it was mine to fix now, which was different from the things that needed doing at the places I'd been renting for the past 8 years. Different in a way I didn't have a word for yet, but that settled into my chest like something that had been looking for its place for a long time. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "Can I come by the farm Sunday?" Not to argue, just to see it again. I set the phone down, picked it up, typed back. "Back door's open." The percolator finished. I poured my coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the field in the early morning light, the mist still sitting low along the creek, the trees on the ridge going green gold where the sun was just coming over. My grandfather had kept a small framed thing on the kitchen windowsill for as long as I could remember. Not a Bible verse, not a motivational saying, just a line, hand-lettered on a piece of cardstock in someone's careful printing, that I had read so many times as a child it had become invisible to me the way familiar things do. But I read it that morning. The ones who stay hardest are the ones who chose to come back. I picked it up and held it for a moment. Set it back in its place on the sill. Then I finished my coffee, put on my boots, and went out to walk the fence line.